What is the creepiest or scariest folklore story you have heard, and what from culture/region did it originate? Orang Maniac, the oily man in Malay. He's a shaman or a supernatural being entirely covered in tar or black oil. He gains and increases his powers by abducting and raping virgins. While I studied in Malaysia, a few girls were raped on our campus and somehow Orang Maniac was blamed. The rumor spread like fire. One weekend there was literally an exodus of students all in panic, because most of them firmly believed we were being attacked by Orang Maniac. Most of the international students were just in disbelief. How shitty for those girls. This guy raped me. No, it was definitely this mythical creature that stole his shape and raped you. He'd never do that. Apostrophe. As a Trinidadian, growing up we were told not to go wandering off into the forests. Downs lived in the forests and were basically children that had their feet back to front. Once they learned a child's name, they would call out to them in the voice of the parents, leading them into the forests. Their footprints would lead the child more astray, losing them in the forests for good. They are said to be lost souls of kids. That's just one weird folklore we have, whereas we have many. I wish I can list them all for you guys. My husband is Trini and last time we visited we were hanging with our 5-year-old nephew by the beach while we waited to go see the sea turtles lay their eggs. Our nephew was running around and being ill-behaved, so occupy him and scare some good behavior into him. My husband told him about the Tao. My husband finishes telling him about it, and my nephew is silent for a moment while he looks around at the cove of trees around us. He then asks, "Is this a forest?" My husband says, "Well, we are surrounded by trees." My nephew considers for a moment before he says very quietly, "I want to go home." We spent the next 30 minutes trying to calm him while he cried hysterically about being scared and convince him that we would protect him from the Tao. His mother was not pleased when we got back. If you hear the scream of a livid woman who is determined to kill you, strip your outer layer of clothing where you stand and sprint, because the mountain witch will take your clothes as a tribute. Adirondack Mountains growing up. Turns out it was mountain lions. Way scarier than a witch. Edit. Didn't expect this to be the most updated comment I've ever had. LMAO. Like I say further down. Opa told me this to scare me and keep me alert, I think. Also thank you for the silver. Stranger. Had a family friend growing up tell us his story that when he was young he was on a scout camping trip and was reading horror novels late into the night trying to scare himself. He all of a sudden started hearing a blood-curdling shriek of a woman outside in the distance. He thought he was imagining it at first because of what he was reading, but then it got closer and closer until the screaming was right outside his tent. He said it was the most scared he has ever been in his life. Turns out it was a mountain lion. I guess the sounds they make when they are in heat sound pretty horrifying. Y'all got this creepy shit. Meanwhile our local legends are about criminals on flying goats. Nah, you've got the stuff of nightmares. Like female horses who sit on people's bellies at night after they've eaten toasted cheese. My hometown is named for the freshwater springs that bubble up everywhere in the woods around town. Obviously this was a perk for early people living there, and so the original settlers were surprised to see that the local Ojibwe avoided the area. They did this because they had a folk memory about a bad spirit that possessed members of the tribe, starting with children, and compelled them to enter into the springs and drown themselves. Naturally they have a prophecy about it too. One day or another, they say, the springs will open again. Apostrophe. When I was little my grandma told me kappas would pull your guts out your butthole if you swam in the river too long. Legend from Japan obviously. Kappa are still creepy to me. But if you give them a cucumber, they'll leave you alone. When I lived in an Australian outback town in the middle of nowhere, our Indigenous Studies teacher, who is Aboriginal, loved to tell us stories. She scared all the first graders straight by telling us never to go out into the desert alone because there lives a monster who is always thirsty. He's always trying to find water, but never can because it hardly rains. So when plump and juicy children become lost in the desert, he jumps on them and drinks all their blood. All he leaves behind are the dry husks of children for their parents to find. I'm sure she was just trying to deter us from wandering off into the bushland. but it left a memorable imprint. I've forgotten the monster's name. Another popular Aboriginal tale is the Tiddalik. Tiddalik was a giant frog who drank all the water in the world. As the other creatures began to die from thirst, they plotted to make Tiddalik laugh. Everyone failed except Nabunum, the eel, who danced and tied himself into knots. Tiddalik laughed uproariously, releasing all the water and filling the rivers and lakes. Many of the creatures drowned in the process or were left stranded on new islands. The concept of a giant, laughing frog scared the cookies off me as a 6-year-old. The Yaramayahu is an ugly little blood-colored monster that lives in the trees and sucks the blood of anyone that rests under the tree. It has suckers instead of limbs and swallows the person after it sucks their blood. Afterwards, the person is vomited back out with skin a little redder than before. This happens again and again until the person turns into a Yaramayahu themselves. The Bunyip is an amphibious monster, part platypus, part crocodile, part dingo, that lives in the billabongs and hunts anyone that gets too close to its billabong. The Yowie is a horrible hairy hominid like a small Bigfoot that usually hides in the bush until it can hunt children and dogs that get separated from the mob. There's also minimum lights, beautiful tiny spirits that lure people into the billabong to drown. An old Japanese lady told me this story. If you have two mirrors facing each other, so the reflections make a tunnel, then you light a candle between them. If you look down the tunnel you'll see a demon putting out the candle in the mirrors as it gets closer, by jumping forward a reflection every time you look away, and if it gets to you, it grabs you, and pulls you into the mirror, to become a demon and pull the next victim in. Pokum. They're apt corpses who hop, because their feet are bound, and if one finds you, it will follow you across the earth. Edit: I made this post on mobile, while trying to fall asleep mayo, so I left out a lot of stuff. I've read that it's an Indonesian/Singaporean ghost. A few people have already said it, but they are apt for burial rites, and they are not malevolent in the slightest. They actually wander in search of someone to untie the top of the wrapping, so they can pass on to the afterlife, and once they find someone they will follow that particular person until untied. The Pokken is commonly described as having a pale green, shriveled and decaying face, with two deep empty holes where its eyes should be, and while it usually does the small hops it's capable of leaping 50 meters. Like someone else said, it can also fly or teleport. While not threatening, and certainly not as scary as some things on this list, the Pokken has always been one of the creepiest / most unsettling thing I can imagine. Edit: my dad says the place is called Pitchford House. Sounds cool. I'll do some googling and see if the stories hold any weight. Also quickly, I misremembered, it's not in my family's village. Sorry y'all. An English village near me has a large old mansion owned by a local family. Most of the rooms in the mansion haven't been touched for years due to the size of the house, and the family refused to go into them, partly due to the fact that there's not enough people living in the house and partly due to hauntings. The house apparently dates back to before the English Civil War, and the family living there were a well-known Catholic family, so of course became a base for the King's Soldiers Cavaliers, I think they were called. The king lost the Civil War, and the family who live there say that they can hear the soldiers stomping around the hallways at night, and occasionally barking orders. They also claim there's a bunch of other ghosts, such as a veiled woman in black who only appears to you if you're in that house, a librarian who will shush people talking in the library room, yes it's that bigger house, a young girl who you can only see through some of the frosted glass doors in the house, banging noises and screaming coming from the sitting room at night, and finally a man dressed in black who wanders the gardens at midday. And these are just the few tales I remember. Even if you don't believe in the ghosts, there's still tons of creepy stuff about that house, such as tiny rooms hidden everywhere for priests to hide in, known as priest holes, a hidden room below the house that leads out to a nearby river, and hidden passageways all around the house. Priest holes are a real thing. They would use them during the Protestant Reformation to hide the priest from the authorities if they suspected you of practicing Catholicism. I'm from northern Brazil near the Amazon River. My grandma always told us the story of the Matata Pereira. At night you can hear her whistle. She is like a witch. If she finds you in the forest she gonna beat you with a leash sheath that she has. The Matata Pereira is a normal human in daylight. She can be anyone from the village. It is like a curse. When you hear her whistle you can call her 3 times. You would scream at her to come drink coffee and the next morning she would visit you in her human form to drink coffee with you. So you could find out who she is. But there is a catch. She would come real early in the morning. You should have coffee and cigar for her, otherwise she would kill you. Everybody who would still be asleep when she arrives would fall ill and die. It was really creepy for me growing up. But today I know that the whistle is a bird. In Brazil we have a lot of those folklore stories. Scariest one I've heard in real life. The cave people. If you explore caves you've probably heard them. The quiet little whispers. They sound like a group talking way off in the impenetrable darkness. I've heard a dozen different versions of what they are. Lost souls, dwarves, evil spirits, or the logical explanation. Drops of water echoing, and your mind playing tricks. Either way, it's a common joke that we all carry 3 sources of light so that it never goes out. Because if it does, they'll come for you. Or it's because it's true darkness down there and you'll likely get lost and fall in a pit. It's a rite of passage for young cavers to be frightened with the stories by older vets. Though I've met a few who really swear to having full conversations with the specters. No matter how you shake it, I'm a giant wimp and still don't like caving alone, or getting too far from my group, or turning my light out for more than a few minutes.